Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. In 1841, Charles MacKay wrote the book Memoirs of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. You can pick up a copy of the original edition for only $13,500. That sounds pretty expensive, but it's less than the cost of 2 years' worth of electricity in the United Kingdom. The University of York predicts that over half of all UK households will be trapped in fuel poverty by next January. This problem wasn't caused by a lack of energy, but rather an excess of insanity in government. In his 1841 book, Charles MacKay wrote, "Men, it has been well said, think in herds, it will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. We find that whole communities fix their minds upon one object and go mad in its pursuit. Millions of people become simultaneously impressed with one delusion and run after it, till their attention is caught by some new folly more captivating than the first." The energy crisis was intentionally created by politicians like Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket.
But kiddo, I want you to just take a look, okay? You don't have to agree, but I want you to look in my eyes. I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate. Okay?
But this madness has actually been going on for more than a century. In 1911, the U.S. government in the New York Times reported, "Coal and wood will disappear from the earth. Coal already is dwindling alarmingly." Then they went on to say that the future was wind power. By means of a simple windmill, power could be produced which would keep the homes of the far northwest at a uniform temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, even in the deadliest cold weather. In 1911, when people referred to the far northwest, they meant extremely cold states like Minnesota and North Dakota. That same year, the New York Times reported, "Martians build 2 immense canals in 2 years. Vast engineering works accomplished in an incredibly short time by our planetary neighbors." The Los Angeles Times reported that Earth was nearing extinction and there was most certainly life on Mars. There was grave news about glaciers. They were rapidly disappearing. At the beginning of February, Texas had an incredible heat wave, with Fort Worth reaching 93 degrees. A heat wave during the summer of 1911 killed thousands of New Englanders and sent many over the brink of madness. Meanwhile, more than 40,000 people died from the heat in Paris. And in Germany, more than 1,000 people died from the heat as well. July 4th, 1911 was the hottest day on record in Boston. They reached 106 degrees. And the Boston Globe reported 112 degrees in Maine and 110 degrees in New Hampshire. July 4th, 1911 was the hottest on record in the United States. Temperatures like these are incomprehensible to modern Americans. On November 29th, 1911, Panama received world's record rainfall of almost 2.5 inches in 5 minutes. Apparently, Earth was having a climate crisis in the year 1911. This was despite the fact that there were a lot of electric cars on the road. At the beginning of the 20th century, 38% of American cars were powered by electricity. Now that number is down to about 1%. In 1910, the New York Times and Thomas Edison reported that they had resolved all of the remaining issues with electric car batteries. But in the year 2022, there's a shortage of electric vehicle batteries, and battery manufacturers are facing a shortage of raw materials in the near future. The CEO of Rivian said that 90 to 95% of the supply chain does not exist. Rivian is losing huge amounts of money, and Bill Gates shorted Tesla. This comes 112 years after the New York Times announced that the electric vehicle battery problem had been solved. Now let's look at the New York Times prediction from 1911 that Minnesota and North Dakota could be fully powered by wind. If we look at wind power statistics from the United Kingdom, it becomes very clear why that will never happen. Wind is inherently unreliable because there are long periods of time when the wind's not blowing. Britain goes through days on end when there's almost no wind and almost no wind-powered electricity. It makes no difference how many wind turbines you have if the wind's not blowing. Solar is even less reliable. The sun doesn't shine at night. And in the mid-latitudes, there's long periods of time when there's very little solar radiation available any time of day. This chart from NASA shows the amount of solar radiation available during different months and at different latitudes. The dark areas indicate that there's not much solar radiation available. You can't generate solar electricity when the sun's not shining. Ford says that their Michigan production facilities are going to be powered by solar and wind. That should be very interesting during the winter when it's extremely cold, the wind's not blowing, and their solar panels are covered with snow. Proponents of wind and solar say, when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, we'll just use electricity which was stored in batteries. But that's not going to happen because there's already a shortage of batteries and the problem is going to get worse in the future. Yesterday, the head of Tesla, Elon Musk, said, realistically, I think we need to use oil and gas in the short term because otherwise civilization will crumble. Billions of people around the world depend on fossil fuels for their day-to-day survival. That's why the usage of coal, oil, and natural gas has greatly increased in recent decades around the world. Meanwhile, wind and solar have made almost no progress, providing less than 3% of the world's energy. These delusions about wind power and electric vehicles have been going on for more than a century. Which takes us back to what Charles MacKay said in 1841. Men go mad in herds, and they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. If you've been following Toto, you know that he's been predicting this government-created energy crisis for the past 14 years. You can visit Toto, Kyrie, Caesar, Toki, and Upala on the web at realclimatescience.com.